A government built on love. I mean, I remember the first moment that I felt that after all these years of studying law, studying the Bible, studying history, studying all the different parameters of man's social structure, and suddenly coming across this, I don't know, utopian thought in a sense, but it was a great moment of awakening to think about a government built on love. I mean, we've been conditioned so thoroughly to think in every other direction but a government built on love that I've never heard anybody ever really say it before, that phrase or anything like it. So it was very refreshing for me to hear this in my heart the day that the Father seemed to put it in there and say, hey, think about this, chew on this a little bit, after we had studied this all through and all the pieces of the puzzle were fitting together. And I said, that's amazing. A government built on love. What do we have today? We have a government built on greed, money, power, lust, everything but love. But a government built on love, and folks out there says, that's kind of neat. Well, but take it all the way where the love is actually mandated. It's legislated. It's commanded. It's law. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love thy neighbor as thyself. We're commanded by our Creator to build our entire system of right versus wrong on love. And of course, a world that has other motivations are not going to like that, because it's going to interfere with everything they want to do for self. They're not focused on others, they're focused on self. A government built on love is focused on others. And it goes very deep, very, very deep. So 2 Chronicles 19:11 says, deal courageously, and Yahweh shall be with the good. Which then you find also in the book of John, it says, there is no greater love than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Well, if you'll lay down your life for your friends, you'll surely do it for your family and loved ones, right? And you especially will do it for your God, if you truly understand what love is all about, and your heart has embraced love above all other concepts of life. But by law, we're to love one another. And so some would say, well, we're not supposed to keep the law. The law was done away with. It's nailed to the cross. Well, we've had a lot of those arguments here on this ministry and on these calls. And we've pretty much smoothed that situation out by showing the truth in the scriptures that the law was never done away with. In fact, these two statements by the Messiah, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love thy neighbor as thyself, these two that everyone seems to think are the only two commandments we have, are not just two commandments, but they are the two basic folders that the other 10 fall into. And of course, all the statutes and judgments fall into those 10. It's a beautiful system. When the apostles and the scribes and Pharisees asked the Messiah, what is the greatest of these commandments? That's how he answered it. He didn't say, in response to a question such as, what is the only two commandments? He was answering a question, what are the greatest commandments? If you remember the passage. And the Messiah said, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like unto it, love thy neighbor as thyself. So there's two that are the greatest. In other words, out of all the commandments, laws, statutes, and judgments, those two are the greatest. In other words, the whole system can be summed up in those two folders. The first 4 vertical commandments of the 10 fall into the first of these greatest commandments. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength. On our other calls, we're discussing those commandments. We're on the second commandment this week, by the way. And the first, second, third, and fourth commandments all fall into that category of love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second folder is, and love thy neighbor as thyself. So the second 6 of the 10 Commandments would fall into those categories. And as the Messiah himself said, all the commandments hang on these 2. As I've said in other videos, if my laundry was hanging on a clothesline, does that mean my clothes have all been done away with? No, they're hanging on a clothesline. The clothesline is the precept upon which all the clothes hang. These 2 commandments are the precepts upon which all the 10 commandments hang. And then, of course, the 10 commandments are the precepts upon which all the statutes and judgments hang. It's a beautiful system when you understand how they've stolen it away from us through deception, metonymy, legalese, and quite a few other ways that they've done everything in their power to distract us. A government built on love. A government that says you must love one another by law. And there's punishment in the event that you don't. Well, people will say automatically, the first thought might be, well, how do you determine what love is all about and what qualifies and determines what one should do for one another if it's about love? Well, that's where the commandments and the laws, statutes, and judgments all fall into place. The Bible's a giant case study history from the time of the beginning when Adam and Eve were created to, of course, the last entry in the scriptures. It's a giant case study history of how the Father sees right from wrong. I like to use the example of, if you love your neighbor as yourself, would you move his boundary stone? Of course not. We wouldn't want to do that. That's a very simple and easy to understand example. But it's actually in the Old Testament. You're not supposed to move your neighbor's boundary stone. I'm paraphrasing. It's worded slightly different in the King James and Geneva. But I think you guys get the picture. When you understand the details under each commandment, and how some of the statutes actually seem to fit or span several different commandments, you can see why they're not directly tied to each commandment, like we might subcategorize things in man's pigeonholed systems. For instance, thou shalt not move thy neighbor's boundary stone could fall under the stealing commandment, and it could fall under the lying commandment as well. It could also fall under the covetousness commandment. So which one do you put it under? I guess it's determined by what was your motivation and or what were the actions taking place at the time, which then is then left in the hands of a great judge who also understands the Father's laws, statutes, and judgments. Would it not? Because your covetousness could have caused you to not love your neighbor enough to want to move his boundary stone. You then would have possibly moved it, which is stealing. And then you wouldn't have said anything to him, which is lying, in a sense. Or if he would ask you, my stone looks like it's been moved. Did you move it? Oh, no, of course not. So any one of those 3, that category could fall under. So it's not laid out like an encyclopedia of rules where it's subcategories like man would do, but laid out in a way that it could be a matrix so that the judge has the option to justify punishing someone who has found a loophole in their hearts or in their own minds. But there are no loopholes when you understand how Father's system works. A government built on love. What a wonderful, wonderful picture. Law. By law, you are mandated. You're ordered. You're commanded to love your God first. Why? Because He, and only He, is sovereign. He's the sole authority over this world. The sole power. The sole legislator. The sole executive. Only He can be trusted to not have his sneaky hand in the cookie jar of law, where man does all the time. Man will do that all the time because he'd prefer and be more lenient on the sins of his own choice. If someone liked materialism, he might be more lenient towards the covetousness laws and not want to press those so hard. So he writes laws that leave loopholes in gaining wealth off others. which is kind of where we're at today in our nation. It's all based on greed, lust, wealth. He who dies with the most toys wins is a common phrase I'm sure all of you have heard. We have to follow the love because we embrace it in our hearts. So we fit in with this system of love because we've been converted to the Father's heart. Those who say the law has been done away with can't feel comfortable and can't embrace the Father's system of law because they haven't been converted to His heart that doesn't want to hurt their neighbor, doesn't want to love their God more than they love themselves, perhaps. This is where the dichotomy comes in. This is where the argument, this is where the resistance to the Father's law system always lands. If I realized that I was tired of being persecuted, tormented, jailed, anything by this tyrannical system that I'm under, whether it be the actual government or just the society itself and its mercantile system that seemed unfair, as we have monopolies taking over little mom and pop stores or what have you. We see it all the time. We've got these mergers taking place for these corporate takeovers. We see all kinds of things that are happening in this society now that are absolutely, completely horrendous. So whether it's the official government or not, or the fascist regime that supports it, that we seem to be under, without argument on my end, it's a fascist regime, which is what Rome itself has always said was its favorite system of government, which was, of course, Hitler's government. But in general, we have learned to embrace the Father's system of love to a point that our consciences bother us more than our poverty or our own suffering. In such a case, our hearts rule for others rather than self. Our hearts rule for the Father and His system of love, therefore, because it deals with that exact issue and mandates that we do that we love others before we love ourselves. For instance, the Father's system of love tells us to humble ourselves. The Father's system of love tells us to suffer for the benefit of others. The Father's system of love tells us that it's better to give than to receive. That kind of a philosophy or approach, a biblical approach, is what fueled one of the greatest societies that ever hit the planet, which was the early American society. And I say one of the greatest. Of course, it was just one of many that tried to resurrect the Father's biblical system. The apostolic age was another. And of course, early Israel before the kings was one that was actually living under it. We're trying to finish that off, what the Reformers and the Puritans had started in the 1700s. Reformation Part 2, if you will. Some might like to look at it that way. Or we call it the New American Puritans. We're going after it because we're looking at it from a giving standpoint, where we look at others rather than self. The opposite system seems to be centralized around another philosophy that some of us would generalize as humanism. It takes many forms. The most common one is psychology, seems to be the religion and the doctrinal beliefs under that one. And of course, a subdivision of that would be psychiatry. Those two then spurred a diametrically opposite society that's historically famous, which would have been the 1930s Nazi Germany. And I think most of us know the real history there, although we're lied to that wasn't such a bad history at all, because of course they want us to follow that. So was the biblical Puritan age what we want to emanate and get back to, or the psychology/psychiatry Nazi Germany? Which one is more loving, more caring, more focused on others rather than on self? America was slipping into that psychology mode in a very serious way during the same time of World War II, where Eugenics was being practiced in some of our states, and we had a lot of people were being sterilized in America because they weren't deemed as being model specimens of the human race. And so by psychiatry and psychology, humanism, we were taught survival of the fittest. The same thing you were taught with evolution, as to how evolution created better and better creatures, how we supposedly had gotten here. Well, we're finding out a lot of neat things in these past couple decades. A big one being the evolution lie, how science is now hands down proving there's no way evolution could have ever even happened. So, in general, we've got to get back to the fact that the Father was right all along. His truth was always in the Scriptures, and it was there in a very mild, humble, and, shall we say, a generous way. It wasn't forced on us like we're having things forced on us in our schools and our government system today. The Father said, I gave you life. I ask you to love one another. Here's my book that explains how that's done. I'd like it if you would read my book, which is my side of the covenant, accept it in your heart, embrace it, and I'll feel that in your heart. At that point, then I can grant you all of your side of the covenant, which would be your prayers and your desire for eternal life with those you love. So long as, of course, those loved ones also make it with you. But in general, he gave us a free will. He said, I gave you life, but I don't want you like robots saying you love me. I want you to love me because you truly do understand my character. And his character is built on love. But as a true parent, there has to be rules to raise up those children, to teach us that law system. The New Testament even tells us that, yes, the law is a schoolmaster. It teaches us. Are we under the law? No. No, those of us who embrace that law are not under the law, as we've talked many times before. Some of my examples, I'll give you one. A town with stop signs. Are the stop signs up for the people who are cautious and love one another and would never barrel through intersections and would come to the intersection slowly and make sure nobody else is going to be bothered by their crossing of that intersection? Or is a stop sign put up for the rebels and the self-focused people who like to have speed or they're in a hurry to get to their next business appointment? The stop signs are put up for those who don't automatically embrace a system of loving others. So yes, everyone in town then has to follow a system of stop signs, which is possibly a little more rigid than if the stop signs weren't there and everyone just slowed down and just carefully looked both ways. But since people can't do that, you have to put a law system up. The law system is there to teach us as a schoolmaster what's right from wrong. It's not right to barrel through an intersection with your hot rod if a little old lady's crossing the street with her walker, because running her over is not a very nice thing to do. In general, the law is there for those who are rebels, and people who do not embrace the law and still want to rebel against it are like the hot rodders. They're barreling through life, saying they don't need the law is dead. Why? Because they don't like the stop signs in life. They haven't learned to embrace it because their heart is still focused on self rather than on others. There's no greater love than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. It doesn't say there's no greater love than this, that a man barrels through an intersection and lays down somebody else's life in doing so. Most folks love a government built on money. And that's what the Roman Catholic Church and many of the churches, of course, that are all underneath it. And we'll try and talk about that in a little bit if we have time. And they're all linked churches who do not want a system built on love. They want a system built on money, taxes, power, greed, lust, you name it, corporatism, fascism. But folks like those of us on this line and those listening in the audio archives, because they love this as well, they love a government built on love. That's what the Bible is, a government built on love. it talks all through the scriptures about endorsing the Father's kingdom or government. They use the word kingdom hoping that we'll think it's a mythical thing from the past, but a kingdom and a government are the same thing. Just like a king and a president are basically the same thing. It's one of the creation who has been put up as a leader in place of the Creator. If that creature follows the Father's laws with impeccable desire to keep that law, that Father's law, then of course it might be an anointed leader. But since man puts the other creature up to task to write new legislation that's more pleasing to the creature, then it's idolatry. A government built on love embraces and honors the Creator more than the creature. A government built on man and humanism embraces and adores the creature more than the Creator. So the lukewarm even, along with the heathen, they dream of a world of money and riches. And that's what the Romish beast system that we're facing is all about. I and you on the line here dream of a world of love and harmony. And that's what the Bible is. It's not a real complicated thing, although with all the legalese, the metonymy, all the different ways they've distracted us, television, radio, magazines, you name it, they want everything to distract us because they don't want that government built on love, because they're not ready to give up self. They have not been able to quit living for themselves first. They can't put the Messiah and His truth, His system of love, above their own wants and needs. Where those of us who have learned that if you put the others first and the Father first, as it should be, all other things seem to fall into place for you anyway. People just are impatient. They want it now. They don't want to build a society built on love because it'll take too long trying to turn the pendulum back as we are up against now. They just want what they want now. Money, riches. It's all coming around too late if they go by a system on love. But a government built on love, it's a wonderful thought. Tyrants and criminals can't like that thought. They can't get the slightest foot in the door in a system like that. That's why the Bible had to go. That's why they've been spending centuries, millennia, trying desperately to get rid of that Bible. But like the hammer striking the anvil, the hammer eventually wears out, not the anvil. That Bible's there forever, folks. That Bible's there forever. It's never going away. It's an eternal book. In our time, the Father is saying, those who are with me, come to my side. Now, you remember the book of Exodus, where right after Moses came down from the mount, they had the golden calf thing going on, all right? You guys sure all know that story. Well, after Moses discovers everything and shows them his anger, because, of course, that was his promise to the Father, that if the Father didn't wipe them all out, he'd go down and he'd straighten them out. Of course, saying he's going to straighten them out, obviously he has to make some people pay for what took place there. The idolatry, the humanism they were all chasing. So what happens? He says very simply, those who are on the Lord's side, come on over here. And, of course, then you have the Levites and many others. They probably, the Bible doesn't give you details, but I'm sure there was a lot of people they hurried up and they came over to Moses' side because they knew he was angry with the rest. He sent the Levites throughout the camp, from gate to gate, slaying everyone who, according to the way we see it as commentary readers and what have you, and what I felt over the years, the instigators that started the golden calf issue. They went through and they slayed about 3,000 men that day. Father was ready to withdraw his spirit from everybody, just like he did in the days of Noah, and just wipe them all out. Moses interceded for them, as in a way some preachers today, like myself, are trying to intercede for this nation. But most people don't want to hear about this government built on love. They want their golden calf, or they want their wealth or their power, whatever it is. All the different things that opposite the 10 Commandments are distracting them from those 10 Commandments and causing them to want to wish those commandments were gone. Because they like Satan's system, which is do what thou wilt, is the whole of the law, which then erases them all for them. They like that. But the Father is, in our time, calling us to choose sides, and he's withdrawing himself from those who didn't want him. So those that are still dancing around the golden calf are in deep doo-doo, and possibly a lot of them don't know it, or some do and don't want to admit it to themselves because they feel it in their consciences, I'm sure. And you'll see some new evidences that I had not mentioned in the past couple of years in the book of Jeremiah. I want to show you the one verse in Jeremiah 6:8. It says very simply, "Be thou instructed, O Jerusalem, lest my soul depart from thee." He's warning you. And of course, as you continue on through the whole book of Jeremiah, you know that the Father's angry with great wrath throughout the whole book of Jeremiah and takes it out on him, sends him into captivity. In the very end, and we'll get to that in a few minutes, where at the end he finally allows them to have their biblical law and justice system back rather than be in captivity in Babylon any longer. But throughout that historic event and that timeline, the people were hard-nosed. They're stiff-necked people. They didn't want to get back to the laws, statutes, and judgments. They all had their own sins of choice that they wouldn't let go of. And we've got a lot of people like that today in our world, too. Jeremiah 44, 10 through 30, explains, "Those will fall by the sword who refuse to follow laws, statutes, and judgments." And you'll see that. I'm not going to read it all. It's too many verses. But it says very clearly that the Father's going to consume all those who refuse to follow the Father's laws, statutes, and judgments, basically. You'll see that starting in verse 10. They're going to fall by the sword. Where does the sword come from? It comes from a government. Whether that's this very government that we're under, or another one that comes in to take over. One way or another. They're going to fall by a sword. Sword and famine. How many of us can actually go get very good food that actually has nutrition in it anymore? It's hard to do, isn't it? It's getting worse and worse. Slowly but surely, a lot of people are falling away, dying of actually starving to death. They don't even know it because they're too busy eating Hostess Twinkies, Doritos, and everything else that they might as well be going outside and eating dirt out of the backyard. They might get more nutrition that way. But we're starving to death worldwide because of the GMOs. You name it. They're making sure we're being loaded up with poisons and are taking away everything that's nutritious for us. Yes, we're eating substance. We're putting something in our mouths, chewing it, and putting it on our belly. So it doesn't feel like the words fit when they talk about famine in the Bible. But that's what's happening. When you're nutritionally starved, you're starved. I want a government built on love. Not one built on greed, power, lust. I want a government built on love. And I believe that government's on its way. Most of you know a lot of the writings I've done over the years, the studies, the calls, the videos. In general, it's very clear that what's starting to take place is a time where I believe the Father's readying us to inherit the kingdoms of the earth. Those of us who are a small but faithful remnant don't want anything to do with what's going on in the world. He that shaketh his hands from the taking of bribes, his water shall be sure. You guys know that passage? Jeremiah 51, 62 through 64 is quite interesting. And Jeremiah said to Ceeator, When thou comest to Babylon, and shalt see, and shalt read all these words, then shalt thou say, Yahweh, thou hast spoken against this place, to cut it off, that none shall remain in it, neither man nor beast, but that it shall be desolate forever. And it shall be, when thou hast made an end of reading this book, that thou shalt bind a stone to it, and cast it into the midst of Euphrates. And thou shalt say, Thus shall Babylon sink, and shall not rise from the evil that I will bring upon her, and they shall be weary. What's that saying? That's a beautiful passage. What's it all tie into? Doesn't it also fit the book of Daniel? The stone cut out of the mountain without hands is going to crush the image. And then there's also the book of Revelation that talks about how a mighty angel is going to cast a great stone into the sea. And it's going to destroy Babylon, isn't it? Isn't it funny how the Father always works in threes? So we find these three images of a stone that's signifying the end of a Babylonian empire, or a worldly empire in general, but we know it to be the Babylonian one, even though the book of Daniel doesn't specifically use the word Babylon. A stone cut out of a mountain without hands. What's that really signify? We've studied that a lot, and of course, I've seen so many things that tie in with that I can safely say stone basically is the Messiah. He is the rock, okay? But the Messiah is what? The Word made flesh. What's the Word? It's the book of the law. And it's cut out of a mountain. What's a mountain? It's a kingdom. It's cut out of a mountain without hands. So there's no hands that cut it out of the mountain. What does that mean? No hands. The Father is a spirit being. He doesn't have hands. That means they're not man-made laws. What is this stone? Basically, if you really look at it all, the stone that is being tied to this book, what is the stone? It's the 10 Commandments. The 2 tablets that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai were on stone, were they not? The Father wrote them himself, wrote them on stone. The laws on how to get along with him and with one another, the 10 Commandments. It's cut out of a mountain, Mount Sinai, without hands. I don't know what the tablets look like, so I don't know if they had saw cuts on them. I kind of doubt it. I'm sure the Father just, blinked his eye, and boy, those tablets were there and had the words on them. They were cut out without hands. The Father's a spirit being. He didn't need hands. Somehow he made those tablets appear for Moses, and he brought them down the mountain. We have them today. What he's saying is tie these like frontlets around your forehead and your hands. Think and do accordingly, according to these laws. Build yourselves a government based on my system of love. The perfect law of liberty, the perfect law of love. And you will subdue all the other kingdoms of the earth. But you have to have faith that it's going to happen. The just, what's just mean? Those who are fair, just, great judgment comes out of someone who's just. The just shall live by faith. Faith in what? Faith in the Father's system, not mankind. Those who want to follow a constitution or some other man-made document of some other title, an Emancipation Proclamation, any kind of document you could think of, we could mention quite a few that surfaced throughout history. We could mention the artificial ones that never really surfaced. They're not really there, like common law, natural law. They're not even there. They're just illusions. The Magna Carta was on paper, but it again was man-made and worthless. Because there's no jurisdictional issue that ties you back to the truth of the Father. No man-made document takes you back to the Father's jurisdiction. Why can't it? If it tied you back completely to the Father's jurisdiction, then it couldn't be anything but the Bible. Every man-made document is not a government built on love. It's a government in contrast or contradiction to that government built on love. Is there a catch? Of course there's a catch. There's a definite catch. The catch is very simple, and it's something most of the folks in the lukewarm yeah, I got that backwards, didn't I? Most folks in the lukewarm world will cringe when I say this word because it teaches us to be quiet. Don't say this too loud. You'll scare people away, but it teaches us to be responsible. You know, that's a bone-chilling thought for a lot of these folks. But look at it this way. Would your future look better in a Nazi-type slave labor camp, as what seems to be coming? Or perhaps a nice home setting where you and your family are simply asked to sit around the fireplace studying the Bible responsibly? Can you do it on your own, or do you have to be forced? Well, the Father gave you a free will. If in your heart you want to teach your family that Bible, if in your heart you want them to make it to a great new kingdom and government system with you, where all already embrace such a beautiful system, then your heart's already there as well, right? If you're not preaching the word to people of this government built on love, as Messiah himself said to the man who said, let me go and bury my father first. You guys know that passage. What did he say? He said, let the dead bury their dead, but go thou and preach the kingdom of God. Christ said it in several different places, to preach the kingdom of God, the gospel of the kingdom of God as well in some passages. The gospel means good news. Kingdom means government. Nobody looks at the Bible as though it's a government anymore. They don't look at it as a book of the law. They don't look at it as any kind of guideline except how to be nice to each other in church. And it's completely lost after you leave the church doors. It's just a mythical book from there on out. We're in a sad, sad state of affairs in this world, where people have been so far drawn away from the fact that the Father is on a throne. His Son is about to take that throne in a sense over us on the earth, and we're not ready for it. Well, some of us are. And that's where I'm heading here now. Our job is a lot like John the Baptist's job, to make straight the way of the Lord, to make straight the way of the Messiah's return. He's coming back a second time. We need to be John the Baptists and start preaching the truth, getting people back to the truth of the scriptures as a book of the law, as a government system that can save us, rescue us, give us salvation. We need to roll out the red carpet for the Messiah's return, so that when he returns, we throw down palm branches and garments and usher him to his throne, put a scepter in his hand that's already ready for him, because we want him to take control. We embrace his system. We already understand the bulk of it. We want him in control to teach it to us with perfection. We want him in control to teach it to the rest of the world who will listen with perfection, which then fits in with Zechariah chapter 14, those that are left who survive what's coming, which most of us seem to understand. Something pretty horrendous is on its way to remind us who's in charge. And as we also see in sections throughout the book of Jeremiah, which I'm just happened to be using today because I'm just recently refreshed myself in that chapter here just this week. The book of Jeremiah teaches us that this last time that we start going by the Father's law, his statutes and judgments, we're never going to let go of again, because he's going to put it in our memories forever, how horrendous it was without it. It makes it sound to me like the times of Noah was like a stroll in the park. It makes it sound to me like the times of Sodom and Gomorrah was just a blink in the bucket. What's coming looks to be pretty horrendous. If we remember, in the book of Exodus, explained to us in Joshua 5:6, those who would not conform or reform to the Father's laws, statutes, and judgments after Mount Sinai had to all be consumed. They all had to die off or be taken out before the rest of Israel, who did want to follow those laws, statutes, and judgments, could then cross the Jordan into the land of milk and honey. Same thing's taking place today. He's allowing us and our wicked overlords to slowly kill us off with all the different slow kill things that they're doing to us, the chemtrails, the GMOs, you name it. It's the day of the great slaughter, triggered when the towers fall. That's the big sign. The seventh trumpet, a day of alarm and trumpet against the high towers and fortified cities. Fortified city being the Pentagon, Washington, the most fortified city in the world. That's Zephaniah 1:15 and 16. A day of alarm and darkness, great darkness. That's what we're in. It all fits when you understand this. It's time for us to inherit the kingdoms of the earth, take that stone that was cut out of the mountain without hands, and follow it as it crushes the image of the beast. It's going to destroy the beast's law system. It's going to destroy its lie system. And it's already starting to happen. In the book of Jeremiah as well, it says in 50 or 51, whatever chapter, I can't remember which one it is. You'll find it if you want to read that. Those two chapters. It talks about how the warriors for the Babylonian system are going to be as women. We can see that in several different ways. The hormone changes in men is one that's absolutely amazing. They try to act all macho watching football, but they won't stand for the actual lives of their families. All the men in the military on all the world stage is basically are all wimped out. And I'm not saying that these guys aren't tough. Don't get me wrong. Physically, some of these guys are they're like robots. They're so strong. And that's due largely because a lot of the steroids they're doing, okay? And I'd never want to pick a fight with any of them. And some of them I even know as good friends. But they don't have the resolve in their heart to have a desire or a reason to fight. They've just been told to. They have no true moral motivation to want to fight, because they're starting to realize how absolutely corrupt the system really is. So it's hard to tell a soldier to go out there and be evil to other people without some other kind of motivation to replace it. Nazi Germany, their motivation was, we got bigger and tougher soldiers above you, you better do what you're told. Turn the knob for the gas chamber, or else someone will come in and turn the knob on you. There's not that many people at the top anymore because too much of this has been coming forward, the truth. We're finding out that all the world was attempted to be turned into a giant Nazi Germany, and that we're all doomed to be exterminated. And so we're all turning our own gas chamber knobs. And we're all starting to look at one another going, what are we doing this to each other for? We need to turn around and look at the people who have destroyed our government built on love that God tried to give us how many different times throughout history. This government built on love is the solution and the only way to be at peace in this life and to then be nothing but in complete joy and complete elation for all eternity. Why are we not listening? Because every single one of us has a distraction going on to some degree or another. Even folks like myself, I get distracted here and there. It's how well your willpower says, no, I know what's right and what's wrong. I got to follow my conscience and look for others before I look at myself. How much do I love my loved ones? How much do I love my neighbors? I would rather they laugh at me to scorn, call me names, mock me, put me in jail, whatever it is, before I ever give up on trying to bring peace and freedom into their own hearts and their lives. A government built on love. A lot of people want that government built on love. But do they want it enough to actually stand with us and help us create that? That's where the Bible talks about the elect in the last days. How many are going to be deceived. The elect. What are the elect? That's a difficult question to talk about here, and I don't want to get into the details of it. But do you consider yourself one of the elect, or are you just one of the lukewarm? Or are you somebody new coming just out of the heathen camp altogether, never having known Christ or the Father at all? There's salvation for all of us. There's salvation even for the Jesuits who would like to stop doing what they're doing. Yes, the Romish people might come after you if you spill the beans, but your eternity will be much better off. And think about the souls you'll save and the lives you'll save by coming forward and telling the truth, like Alberto Rivera did and some of the others. It's better to be a martyr and have a greater resurrection than to live with the guilt of knowing you didn't do what you should have done to help this government built on love take root. Well, that's going to be it for the message today. We need to build a government built on love and roll out a red carpet for the Messiah's return. That we're, as a remnant, we're standing, waiting to be the ushers, to usher him to his throne, where all we have to do is hand him the scepter, and he takes over. That's his day of glory, folks. We need to start setting that up so that there's a throne for him to take a seat in. We need to start showing the world that that's what needs to come. And those who will see that a government built on love is the only answer, and that only truth can bring that to us, may start to join us in larger numbers. And as I've been saying and signing a lot of my emails lately, when truth prevails, love is the reward. I want to thank you for being with us, and thank the Father for blessing us that we were able to bring this forward. There should be many others to follow this in the weeks and maybe months to come, as it seems like this is the turning point in man's demise for those of us who are at least focused in the right direction. We're going to continue to move onwards and upwards. Those who refuse to bury self, the old man, the natural man, and be born again, truly born again, into the embracing the Father's system of love, they're going to be left behind, in a sense. They're not going to make it with us. That's also in the book of Jeremiah, a section that very clearly shows that the Father's not going to have pity for them. We need to catch their attention as soon as we can, because I have a strong feeling it's almost over. Well, thanks for joining me on that one. We'll stop the recording here, split it up, and we'll do a Q&A here to come out of this one. So thank you for joining me on that one.